good, and thank you, Cathaoirleach. And I'd like to welcome all colleagues here this evening, and particularly to the Minister who's taking the motion. I would like to thank the Government for accepting the motion without amendment. I'd like to formally move it now and propose the motion. And I gain some heart from that there may be an inkling of some movement on the Government side to actually having a look at this area. And I'd like to thank colleague Senator Lanslandi for his support and interest in the matter, and also great to see Senator Colin Burke here this evening with us, who has a direct professional knowledge and interest in this sphere. And I was contacted when this motion was tabled, Minister, and someone asked, what's the motivation, what's behind this, what's going on? Well, there's nothing going on, but the motivation is quite simple and straightforward. I'm always horrified, as I think most right-thinking people would be, when they see the phrase on the television or in the papers, the state versus. And for me, I've always been of the view, and perhaps naively, that the state should always have the interest of its citizens at heart. That the state and the apparatus of the state and the functions of the state and the institutions of the state should always have at the core of their value system and of their modus operandi to support the citizen, to assist the citizen, and to intervene on the citizen's behalf whenever they need and whenever they're in distress or requiring of support. However, unfortunately, it's not always the case. And it is really harrowing to see, and you'd want to have a heart of stone, some evenings on the 6 o'clock news, and it's all too frequent. And indeed, this is something that my colleague Senator Ivana Bacik and I have discussed. I mean, when we actually tabled this motion originally, only that very day, yet another case unfolds in the front pages of our papers and on the 6 o'clock news, where yet another family, in my opinion, are unnecessarily dragged through the courts to seek justice, and to seek justice very often after years of trying to achieve fair play on behalf very often of their family and of their children. I think we must bring this to an end. It is unnecessary, even on a financial basis. The legal costs, the legal treadmill that we set in motion when the state takes an adversarial and obstructive position against the interests of the individual or the citizen. This is clearly a David and Goliath struggle and battle, because most families do not want to be in court any day, any way. They certainly do not want to end up in the High Court for years on end. Can you imagine? Through no fault or blame of their own, to seek justice and a settlement and compensation on behalf of their children. But very often, we add insult to injury by dragging it out. But not only that, the state is not acting in my name or on my behalf or on our behalf when they do this. So I don't know where this culture, where this system emerged from. We could perhaps easily maybe, point a finger at the legal fraternity. That would be unfair. We could point it perhaps at the insurance industry, where the culture is accept nothing, own up to nothing, don't accept any fault, blame or liability, and let's drag this out. Because very often, in this case, the plaintiff is the small person in the equation with no resources or little resources, taking on the giant and the apparatus, which is the state, which is deemed to have deep pockets. But those deep pockets are the pockets of the Irish taxpayer. And those deep pockets are not to be used to frustrate fair play, common sense and natural justice when a wrong has been done, perhaps by mistake, by misadventure or some mishap. This is not a question of apportioning blame. This is a question of seeking to change a culture and a system which has at its heart a default position of that the state will go to war on its citizens as the opening position. Very often to find itself 5 and even 10 years down the road to eventually accept liability, to eventually apologise and eventually pay compensation anyway. But all that has happened in the intervening years is to prolong the trauma and the harrowing process on families and their children, not just the child that is affected directly, but their siblings. Can you imagine the stress and trauma and pummeling in that family home as people try to cope, again through no fault of their own? And eventually they get a lame apology and belated compensation. And while the compensation is all very fine and good, very often when the child is into their teenage years or even young adulthood, what we have is the intervening years have been lost. And we all know the importance very often of early intervention, supports and services that cannot be reclaimed thereafter. Very often the damage cannot be undone because of the delay. So what I'm seeking here is some common sense and some compassion to be introduced to this culture so that the State Claims Agency acts on behalf of its citizens and not in conflict with its citizens. We must remember that the State Claims Agency is operating under the mandate of the Oireachtas, of the legislature, so the responsibility ultimately, Minister, rests with us to change that system. And we can do so. I'm not saying throw it out, I'm saying reform it. I'm saying we can have a hybrid system. Why don't we have mediation? Why don't we have independent arbitration first before we go into the long, arduous process of a difficult court case? I've been told by members of the legal fraternity that the only thing very often agreed when they take a case in good faith on behalf of a plaintiff, the only thing that is agreed is the name of the plaintiff and that they're actually standing in court that day. But they step back from everything else. And you have to slog it out and prove everything, every minutiae, every iota, every step of the way, for years on end, being dragged through the High Court in the name of the state. They're certainly not doing it on our behalf and on our names, and this is wrong. So what I'm saying, Minister, is that there is an opportunity here. This is an opportunity not only to save millions and tens of millions on behalf of the taxpayer, because that's the kind of bill we're looking at, but we can do so and also show our citizens that the apparatus of the state is not pitched against them, but it's there to help and support them. And where a wrong and the damage has been done, that it's accepted. And it's possible to accept it in a no-fault scenario. This system works very well in Australia, for instance. So we can have a situation where people can receive interim settlements, periodic payments, and a settlement and compensation where there is no fault ascribed or sought. But what it does is it diffuses the need unnecessarily for families to be dragged through the courts, to run up hefty legal bills, and to run the risk of losing perhaps and having to pay costs to the other side. And the other side, again, is the state. And we see that more and more in the courts, where I see institutions of the state, whether it's Airgrade or whether it's on board Penala, pitched against its own citizens and its own communities, and that's wrong and it's unnecessary. And just for the record, Cathaoirleach, Minister, the State Claims Agency represents 129 different apparatuses and bodies and institutions of the state. Currently, it has on its books over 7,000 cases, with a potential liability of 1.5 billion. Also, we've done our research here, and we can see that last year and the year before, the pattern is the same over the last decade. That, on average, the settlements now are reaching in order of 100 million per annum. But a further 50% in terms of costs are being added to those settlements in terms of legal costs and expenditure on behalf of the State Claims Agency on one hand and the legal costs of the plaintiff on another. So this is actually a very straightforward proposition, Minister. We are asking that this system, particularly in the area of medical negligence as it's categorised, can be reformed, should be reformed, and it would effectively be a win-win situation for families, for citizens, for communities, for the operations of the court system, even for the insurance industry itself, because this adversarial approach is skyrocketing insurance premiums, and in fact to the point whereby, and my legally qualified colleagues will perhaps speak to this, where insurance companies have refused to give cover to surgeons and consultants. And, Cathaoirleach, in summing up, there's no end in sight to this system, because I am aware that listed on the court schedule for early next year are a further round of cases being taken by parents who absolutely don't want to go to court, who want to sit down with the HSE and reach a fair and reasonable settlement, because their children have been inflicted by narcolepsy, by the swine flu vaccine that the state administered, albeit in good faith, but nevertheless it is accepted that it has had a profound negative impact and intrusion on these young people's lives, many of them who have gone through school and college now and are young adults. And they're still awaiting the state to put its hands up and say, look, we made a mistake here, we want to help you. And instead of doing that, we're fighting them tooth and nail. We're not being honest. We're not being honest in the name of the citizens. And we're going to drag them to the High Court, and I'm going to tell you what the outcome will be. We'll see it on the 6 o'clock news. We will pay out millions, we will eventually apologise, and we will pay the lawyers more and more money in the process, and the apology will be a lame one and pointless to the families who have had to endure this system in the intervening period. We cannot wash our hands of it. We cannot say it's nothing to do with us. Minister, I implore you to use your good offices. And I welcome that the government have taken this motion, and I'm asking that some action would be taken to reform the State Claims Agency so that families have the option of an alternative system of a no-fault settlement process under mediation to avoid this scenario that need not occur at all in the first place. Thank you.